So if you've listened to the last video in this series, you'll know exactly what you need to do in the first 30 seconds of any talk to grab your audience's attention, establish the credibility that you need, and to make sure that they are waiting, hanging on your every word for the benefits that they're going to get from listening to the rest of what you've got to say. The next thing that you need to do is to ensure that you connect with your audience, and that's what this video is going to be about. All of the literature that you can find on how to talk, how to present with impact, and the experience from very popular speakers around the world shows us that getting that connection is what enables us to now communicate on a deep level with our audiences. This is not just now communicating ideas and enabling people to learn something new. I'm actually communicating ideas on a much deeper level now that change how I think, how I see the world, that make me really consider what I might now do with what I've just learned. And this is a challenge. So I'm going to give you, as I have with the last video, a short story to illustrate this from my own practice. And then I'm going to give you some tips that will practically enable you to do that step of empathy and to connect with very diverse and potentially quite large audiences in a really effective way. Now, the story I've chosen to tell you is a slightly embarrassing one, this one. It was an empathy fail where I ultimately ended up coming up trumps, where it turned out that empathy was the thing that saved the day as well. So this was a presentation at the beginning of a workshop that was designed to get a bunch of stakeholders to think about whether they might join with us together in a research project. We wanted to have a professional facilitator. It turned out that we misbudgeted for that, and so we asked a friend to come and do it for us. We paid him a small amount of money so he could come to visit us to go to a conference, and in return for that he said, yeah, I'll facilitate your workshop. Now, he had an incredible reputation, does workshops like this all over the world. We knew that we were in safe hands. Also, we thought, until we discovered that there was a slight problem, as you'll discover. Now, the first thing that happened was that our facilitator arrived and gave a practice talk for his presentation at the conference. And I wasn't expecting this, and neither were any of the stakeholders. And you could see all these people looking to each other and asking, are we in the wrong place? What's going on here? And so instantly there was a connection fail at the beginning of this event. This wasn't about what they were expecting. This wasn't to do with any of their interests. This was something a bit strange. And then we started the day, and our facilitator stood and watched as people started to discuss. And it didn't do very much as people then started to argue with each other, and tempers started to flare. And he just stood there. Time for the break came and went, and he was still standing there. And I said to everyone, look, I might just be a PhD student, but I think it's time for a break. And called time on the argument, and went to my facilitator to say, so what's going on? It doesn't look like you're really doing much facilitation. And he said, well, yeah, there's just one minor problem, which is that I'm an American that's lived most of my life in Europe, and all of these guys have got thick Yorkshire accents. I can't understand a word anyone's saying. And I was like, right, okay, that's a minor problem, but we've got a plan B. We've got these various exercises, so let's move to these exercises after the break. Great. We did this. And at this point, something else went wrong. So I had interviewed every single person in depth before we'd gone into them, and I'd chosen people based on those interviews to come to the workshop. But there were 4 gentlemen who had not been invited, and they were all clustered together at the end of a table. And I made the mistake of not asking who they were. So instantly, how do you connect when you don't even know who the people are that in theory you're trying to connect with? And so we handed out the post-it notes, explained the exercise, and everyone did their thing, except for these 4 guys. And so now I'm explaining to them again, so this is what you do you understand? Yeah, we understand. Still nothing. And now everyone is finished. All eyes are on the 4 gentlemen at the end of the table. So I'm explaining, okay, so this is what you do, and yeah, do you understand? And they're like, yeah. So I said, why are you not doing it? And they said, we're not literate, we can't read and write. And I just wanted the ground to swallow me up at that point. I was mortified at what I'd done to these 4 poor gentlemen. Humiliating them in front of their colleagues and their friends and people that they wanted to influence. And yeah, disaster. So instantly I'm like, right, I can see that lunch is looking like it's already ready. We're going to go for an early lunch. And I went to my facilitator. Do you have a plan C which doesn't involve speaking, reading, or writing? To which the answer was, of course, no. And so I then did the facilitation in the afternoon, and he took notes, and we kind of thought, well, I kind of thought, yeah, I've saved the day to an extent here. And I was busy thinking, right, I'm going to go around each of these people individually, I'm going to apologise for what happened today, I'm going to bring this back, it'll be fine. And then, right at the end, our facilitator came in and said, right, so to conclude the day, I'm going to do a round robin. I want everyone to say, in a sentence, what you thought of today's workshop, and tell us whether or not you'd be willing to collaborate in the project. And I was like, no, don't do that, because they're all going to say no, and that's it, we're going to burn our bridges. I was going to go around and talk to these people, but it's kind of too late now. And so, one by one, these people gave us their view of the workshop, and they did not pull any punches. I mean, it was disastrous, and they told us, please do not ever do this to us again. And at the same time, they then each, one by one, to my surprise, said, and yes, we would be willing to collaborate on this project. And what I saw happening again and again was people giving me eye contact and saying, we're willing to work with you. And what I realised had happened was that whilst we had broken that connection, whilst we had facilitated an absolute disaster between the 2 of us of a day, I had established an empathic connection with each of them as I had interviewed them, well, apart from the 4 that gate crashed us. And that connection was enough for them to say, you know what, I trust you, Mark. I can see that you didn't mean for this to happen, and you know what, I give you a second chance. So today's episode is all about how you can connect with people who are very different to you, and potentially very diversely different to you. Now, it's hard enough generating an empathic connection one-to-one with someone that you've not met or that is very different to you. How do you do that when your challenge is an audience of hundreds of people who are all completely different to each other as well as to you? And that is the task that you have. And I'm going to give you some tips that can practically help you to shortcut that process very effectively. And of course, the first thing is that ideally you need to research your audience, unlike what I had ended up doing in my story. And so I know that we've got, broadly speaking, 2 very different types of people. So in the training that I was doing in Australia recently, I had one training where I had 3 very different groups of people in the room. And it was pretty much 33, 33, 33. And so now I'm making sure that at each point, there's a point for all 3 segments of that audience, and nobody feels left out. Now, great if you're able to plan for that, but sadly, we're not always able to plan for that. So this is going back last year now. Last time I was in Australia, I had to do a public lecture based on my work on impact. And this was something that I'd never thought about as a public lecture before. I've always done this for researchers. So I was a bit nervous about this, and I tried to come up with something that I thought would be of broader interest to the public. But this is now not just the public, this is the Australian public. And I'm not really sure who these people are and why they're going to come to this public lecture. And sure enough, they came. The place was packed. And so I had limited time. And the first thing I did was to go right to the back of that lecture theatre and sit down next to someone and ask them, so, why are you here today? What are you interested in? What do you want to get out of this? And just keeping asking those why questions. So why is that interesting? And why do you need to know that? And what might you use that for? And just kind of probing and probing. Now, my goal was to ideally then move and talk to someone else, but then I was told I needed to come to the front, time's up. I'm now making an assumption that perhaps that person might be representative of at least a few people in that audience. And now I'm talking to the lady in the red dress on the back row and everyone else like I'm talking to her. I've opened that channel of empathy with her in that one-to-one that I've had, and now I'm trying to maintain that empathic connection and to talk to the rest of the audience as though I'm speaking to her. And it went well. Now, the next tip for me is a bit of a hack, I would suggest, which is that whether or not you know your audience, you can use stories to create incredibly powerful connections to your audience. And essentially what I'm trying to do with a story is to try and emphasize points of commonality between me and my audience. So I'm not perhaps as socially distant as you might think I am. I'm not quite as different as I might look. And here is something that makes you realize that, we are connected as fellow human beings through similar experience or whatever it is that you draw on in these stories. And so, for example, I will tell a story when I'm teaching people about how to do presentation skills, about my first ever lecture, and I had a panic attack, and I got heckled by a student with this crazy eye-type piercing thing that went out from the bridge of her nose. And I crumpled. And in the end, I ended up walking out of the lecture because I completely dried up. There was nothing in my mind, it was blank. And it was an excruciating silence, punctuated only by the heckling, and then me walking out. This was not a great experience. And I often couple that then with the story that I told last week about then a few years later going and talking to the United Nations. And what you get from a story like that is a sense of, I wasn't expecting that. Mark looks like he's a fairly confident speaker, and you had a panic attack in front of 200 students and walked out of the lecture theatre. Whoa. And then, okay, a few years later, you're talking to the United Nations. So maybe, like you, I'm a nervous speaker. And actually, although you look like this is easy to you, maybe like me, there was a time when you found this hard, and I can relate to that, and you can probably now relate to me, and you're not way up there on a pedestal. There is a connection there. And stories like those have, I think, 4 characteristics that make them incredibly powerful, make them memorable, and make them really useful vehicles for connection. They are personal, they are unexpected, they are visual, and they are visceral. They engage with the emotions to some degree. And so the stories that I'm telling in each of these episodes are personal in various ways. I'm making myself vulnerable by telling you about presentation fails very often. And you're realizing that, even people like Mark, who look like they don't do these kind of things, actually do just like me. And this is relatable now. There's an element of the unexpected, I hope, in some of these stories where, someone like you doesn't do something like that. Well, actually, these kind of things happen to us all, and that might not be expected, but there you go. I've tried to add visual elements into this, whether it might be the look of the student who was heckling me, whether it's the cavernous hole and the country labels in front of the people as I walked into this UN convention centre, or the 4 guys clustered at the end of the table. You're trying to paint these visual pictures that mean that, I'm there, I'm right there with you now. And for me, if you can use some of the senses as well, then even more powerful. Great. And each of these stories also engage with the emotions. And so now I'm engaging with you, not just on an intellectual level, but at that deeper level as a human being, with my values, with my beliefs, with my identity. That, I'm like you, you're like me, and I get what you're saying now at this much deeper level, and I'm engaging with you at that level now. Now, of course, you can overplay the emotional kind of element of these things, and I think we need to be careful with that. And we need to, all the way through this, just watch at what point this might potentially look or become, in reality, perhaps manipulative. The second hack I'm going to give you is you-focused questions. So if empathy and connection is about putting yourself in the shoes of your audience and getting your audience to put themselves in your shoes, then how can I actually now ask you directly to do that? So if you were in my position, what would you do? Let me paint a scenario for you. And now what would you do if you were in this situation? Or maybe I'm going to actually give you some of my research on scenarios, and this is what I think might be the future. But actually, this is potentially your future. And if this is your future, what would you do? How would you respond? What would you say? What would you do next? And by asking those you-focused questions, asking people explicitly to put yourself in the shoes of me, of that future person, of the group that we want to help, or whatever it is, I'm getting those people now to, again, engage beyond just intellectually I understand there's a problem. No, now, intellectually I understand there's a problem, and I feel that problem. I feel what it's like to be in the shoes of a person who experiences a challenge like that. And now I'm using what I've learned to think about how I might actually respond to that situation. And now actually, you know what, maybe I actually do that thing. And this is not just intellectual, this is now an action I'm forming in my mind. I may even go as far as asking people to form intentions. So what are you going to do as a result of this? What is that one action that you're going to take that's going to take you one small step closer to that particular goal, that benefit that I described at the beginning of my talk, for example? And then finally, what about body language? Now I'm going to talk a little bit more next week about body language, but at this point I'm going to suggest two things, one uncontroversial and one a little bit challenging. So the very obvious one is that I'm going to try and use some open body language. And I want this to be open and approachable in particular. So I've not got my jacket on today because perhaps actually I think that is something that sets me apart, that nobody else in this audience is wearing a jacket, so why am I trying to look fancy? And great, so instantly I'm looking approachable simply because I took my jacket off, perhaps. And I've got open body language here. I'm taking up enough space to show that I have confidence. I'm not hiding, I'm not crossing my arms, I'm not putting my hands in my pocket and hunching myself up and hiding and looking nervous or unconfident. And for me, this is really important because what it does is it conveys that I believe what I'm talking about. I have the courage of my convictions, and therefore you should listen to what I'm saying, and you should believe what I'm saying, perhaps. Here's the evidence, of course. Let's make sure that we are very, very well grounded. And I think that this has power because we learn from a very young age, as children, that whenever you see a disconnect between what comes out of a person's mouth and their body language, there's a good chance that they're lying. When someone is lying to you, you listen to their body language and you believe their body language, not the words that come out of their mouth. And we're so well conditioned that if you are saying something based on the evidence and you're saying it in such a nervous, unconfident way, that through your body language, through your arms and ums and shaky voice and everything else, that it looks like you really are not confident in that. Now, actually, it's not just I've got a shaky voice. It comes across like actually my opinions are shaky. The evidence indeed might be shaky. And I'm undermining the credibility of my message. So what you're trying to do is to get a consonant set of body language and mode of speaking with your evidence, and you're not undermining that in any way. And so, great. You look confident, you look solid, you look open, you look approachable, you look trustworthy. I'm listening to what you're saying, and it sounds like you've got evidence. Great. It all works. Really important. I don't know what the evidence of this, but this fascinated me when I read this. But I heard recently that there might be an evolutionary basis to how people react to people who introduce themselves with open hands. And if you look at TED Talks, you'll see that this is something that happens on a very regular basis on the TED stage. People come onto the stage and they have open hands. And the idea in evolutionary terms here is that back in the mists of time, if I introduce myself to you, if I come to you and I'm a stranger, and I've got my hands behind my back, or my hands in my pocket, my hands are concealed. And that means I could be concealing some form of weapon. And on some subconscious level, there's this sense that, what's this person hiding? Can I trust them? Might they be about to harm me or manipulate me in some way? And by contrast, actually, yeah, I'm here, empty-handed. I am not a threat. I'm here now to work with you and to open a channel of empathy, and you can trust me. The more controversial final thing that I'll say is this idea of mirroring. So this is, I would argue, human nature. And this is just a hack into everyday human nature, stuff we do all the time. But as I explain this, you'll see how you might perceive this to be manipulative, or potentially how you might use this in a manipulative way. And so the idea of mirroring is that I am now mirroring the body language of my audience. And as I do that, I effectively, on a subconscious level, say, I'm like you, you're like me. So I'm dressing similar. I maybe you're going to start by sitting down. Maybe you're looking a bit tired, and so I'm kind of opening a channel of empathy to say, yeah, it's after lunch, and I'm feeling a bit tired as well. And yeah, and I'm talking slowly, and I'm kind of feeling for what it's like to be you at this point in time. And then I'm gradually standing up and straightening my body language and my posture, and raising my tone of my intonation and my volume, and saying, yeah, this is great, we're really excited about this stuff, and actually, yeah, I see people kind of brushing themselves down or sitting up in their seats, and yeah, I'm paying attention, and I've got enough energy to keep going with this now. And you see people respond in that way. Now, for me, this is just the stuff that we do of everyday life. So I'm walking along the street, and I'm in a quiet reverie, and an old friend comes up, slaps me on the back. They're like, Mark, how are you doing? And I was feeling very quiet at the time, but I instantly raised my voice, and I'm like, yeah, great, really great to see you, fantastic. And I go into that mode with them. In the same way, I walk into a room, and I'm like, hello, how are you? And the person says, great, I'm good, but and I instantly reply with, yeah, okay, why are we whispering? And I can't help but just change my tone of voice to mirror the person that I'm working with. If I respect them, if I want them to respect me, if I'm trying to in some way connect with that person. And of course the opposite stands to reason as well. But this is someone that I really don't like. I'm in my quiet reverie walking on the street, and this really annoying person slaps me on the back and is like, hey, Mark, how are you? I'm fine, thanks. I'm very different to you, and I'm not going into whatever your thing is, because yeah, we're different, and I'm making that point of difference. So we do this on a regular basis, and we do it without meaning to. And the idea is that, well, can we use that now to energize a group, or to open a channel of empathy, to build trust, to get people to think more deeply than they otherwise might be willing to do? And can you use your body language to do that, just by subtly, gradually shifting your body language to make it more open, more approachable, more trustworthy, more energized, or whatever it is that you want to do in terms of taking that audience to a place where they're ready to really deeply listen to the message that you have got. So my message today, empathize, connect. I believe that this is the most important of all of the 5 principles that I'm going to go through in this little series of videos. Because once you have connected with your audience, now you have the opportunity to genuinely communicate, and to communicate at a level that people will now respond in kind, at a level where they now are not just engaging intellectually, where they're engaging at a level where now I might actually do something as a result of this. And that's why, for me, connecting with audiences through whatever means, but perhaps some of the suggestions I've made today, is what can enable you to make the difference between just informing people and actually generating impact from your talk.